Good morning. I'm Kong, the campus pastor, and if this is your first time in a Novembering, or if you've been here before for other services, today's service is a little unique. It's special. Ironically, it's one of my favorite services. It's also a very sad service. And so if you're joining us for the first time in person or online, or if you've been here before for Novembering, it's going to feel a little different. That's okay. We want to create this space for all of us to mourn, to grieve, to think about the things that we've lost, the people that we've lost. And so I invite you to sit in the tension, to sit in something that's different in the next hour here as we just create some space for all of us to sit in the grief, the loss, whether it's our own or others. And so welcome to Novembering. In the past 2 weeks, I've lost the most people I've known in a while. Last night I shared with the Brooklyn Park campus that I could count 4 individuals. A college friend of mine, his name was Sifik Omeng. He was the former youth pastor at St. Paul Hmong Alliance. I knew him as Roach. A couple days before he passed, his father passed, and they both passed due to COVID. Another college friend of mine, his name's Thule, he lost his father. And then a friend, his name's Nikam, lost his father as well too. This morning I thought of 2 others who had recently lost loved ones. Another college friend of mine, he lost his father-in-law to a stroke. And I think about a cousin who passed away due to COVID as well too. 6 losses in 2 weeks. That's 3 losses each week. I mourn over the loss of all these individuals. I think we all share a similar story where we've lost many people to death this past year and a half, whether it's our friends, family members, parents, spouses, children, maybe even our pets. We might even also experience ambiguous loss, where we've missed out on things like family traditions, life experiences like birthdays, or when a new baby is born into our family, maybe graduations, big milestones that we usually celebrate, but due to the conditions of where our world's at, just haven't had time to do that, or we haven't done that for our own safety. Maybe we've lost relationships due to separation, divorce. Maybe we've lost friendships due to difference on how we view politics, social issues that have happened over the last year and a half, maybe even our thoughts around COVID. What do we do with so much loss in this year and a half? How do we deal with all that grief and pain? And compounded on top of that are all the losses of our loved ones that we've experienced before COVID. How do we go about the holidays? How do we go about life? Knowing that our family, friends, spouse, children, parents, any of our loved ones won't be there this holiday. Sometimes it feels like we need to move on from grief and mourning. Just need to get over it. We might distract ourselves with work, hobbies, maybe some other healthy or unhealthy alternatives to medicate the loss, to heal the pain. Today at Novembering, I want to let you know it's okay for us to slow down, you and I. Slow down a little bit. And let's sit with that grief and loss. We want to create a space to say it's okay to grieve, mourn, be sad, be angry, and feel everything else that you may feel about the lost ones in your life. I don't want us to rush grief. I don't want us to rush loss like Pastor Greg had mentioned it. I hope that today we get a chance to engage it. We can engage it because God engages with it. See, Jesus preached about those who mourn and how they will receive blessing. The Psalms, all 150 chapters of them, an entire book filled with sacred songs and hymns used to worship God. About a third of those psalms are considered to be lament psalms that deal with grief, mourning, even hopelessness. So if this is your first time attending Novembering, or if you're not quite sure how you'll be in service today, it's okay. God can handle our pain. God can handle our grief. I mentioned that about a third of the Psalms talk about grief, talk about lament. And so today we're going to be in one of them. We're going to be in Psalm chapter 77 to experience how an individual dealt with grief. So let me read this for us. I cry out to God. Yes, I shout. Oh, that God would listen to me. When I was in deep trouble, I searched for the Lord. All night long I prayed with hands lifted towards heaven, but my soul was not comforted. I think of God and I moan, overwhelmed with longing for his help. You don't let me sleep. I am too distressed to even pray. I think of the good old days long since ended, when my nights were filled with joyful songs. I searched my soul and pondered the difference now. Has the Lord rejected me forever? Will he never again be kind to me? Is his unfailing love gone forever? Have his promises permanently failed? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he slammed the door on his compassion? And I said, this is my fate. The Most High has turned his hand against me. But then I recall all you have done, O Lord. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. They are constantly in my thoughts. I cannot stop thinking about your mighty works. O God, your ways are holy. Is there any God as mighty as you? You are the God of great wonders. You demonstrate your awesome power among the nations. By your strong arm, you redeemed your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. When the Red Sea saw you, O God, its waters looked and trembled. The sea quaked to its very depths. The clouds poured down rain. The thunder rumbled in the sky. Your arrows of lightning flashed. Your thunder roared from the whirlwind. The lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your road led through the sea, your pathway through the mighty waters, a pathway no one knew was there. You led your people along that road like a flock of sheep, with Moses and Aaron as their shepherd. Now, it isn't clear what the writer is grieving about, but it's a big deal. The writer does not hold back on how he feels about God. In verses 1 through 9, the writer says that God doesn't listen to him. God doesn't comfort him. He can't sleep because of God. He's become an insomniac. And then specifically in verses 7 through 9, the writer asks these questions about God. I'm going to read these questions again. Has the Lord rejected me forever? Will he never again be kind to me? Is his unfailing love gone forever? Have his promises permanently failed? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he slammed the door on his compassion? The writer feels like God has completely abandoned him, and his grief has completely overtaken him. Again, these are some raw emotions that might leave us to wonder if this is okay. Can someone believe in God and say these things? Can a writer who wrote a chapter in the Psalms say these things about God? And these psalms are songs used to worship God. I think something to consider from the psalmist is this. If you do feel sore hurt by God's absence, then why do you even approach God with your grief? You see, the writer knows that the only one who can heal him from his grief is no one else except God. Only God can fix this. Only God can restore this. Only God can make this right. So it's not a matter that the writer doubts God or dishonors God, but the matter is God is the only person who can make a difference. And in realizing this, the writer takes a very unusual turn in the next half of the passage. In verse 11, this is what he says. But then I recall all you have done, O Lord. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. They are constantly in my thoughts. I cannot stop thinking about your mighty works. O God, your ways are holy. Is there any God as mighty as you? You are the God of great wonders. You demonstrate your awesome power among the nations. What an unusual turn after he's questioned if God's compassion is even on him. I wish I could tell you all his grief and despair and loss and mourning was taken away. But it sounds like none of it was resolved. Instead, the writer reflected on all the wonderful deeds that God had done. Some translations interpret this idea of thinking about what God has done as meditating on God's wonderful deed, the idea of meditating on it. And if we continue to read on, the writer meditates on God's deed of specifically freeing the Israelites from Egypt. For the writer, this was the greatest moment of God comforting the Israelites from their deepest grief, from the darkest moment of their despair when they were slaves in Egypt. His meditation leads him to be hopeful, even though he still experiences his grief. So if it's one thing from Psalm 77 that we need to understand about grief, it's this. Meditate on God to maintain hope while you mourn. Meditate on God to maintain hope while you mourn. Meditating on God simply means to fill our minds, you and I, our minds, with what God has done. And one of the best ways to meditate on what God has done is to engage in the Bible and His Word to understand who He is and what He does. So while we mourn, fill our minds with moments where God has helped others in His grief, in their grief. And while we mourn, fill our minds with moments where God has helped us with our grief. This helps us maintain hope in the truth that God will help us with our grief. And this can all be done while we mourn. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both. You might have lost friends, family members, maybe a spouse, parents, a child, grandparents, maybe even a pet. You might feel unsettled in the situation you're in, and you may not get any answers, any immediate answers for the grief and loss that you experience. But as we mourn and grieve, we can meditate on God by filling our minds on what God has done. Meditate on God because it reminds you that God has comforted others' griefs, and He will comfort your grief. Again, the writer turned back to Egypt when the Israelites were slaves to find hope that if God did that, God could heal my grief too. you and I, we can meditate back to Jesus, because that's the greatest thing that we've experienced or that we know about, to see what he has done. And then we can also meditate back to what Jesus said to understand what he will do with our grief. So not only can we look back to see what Jesus has done, but we can look back to see what Jesus will do. This helps maintain our hope in Jesus. So church, mourn and grieve. And meditate on Jesus while you're at it. Because we know that only Jesus can make it right.